So I just wanted to share with you the reminder really of how easy it is, essentially from not practicing and starting to practice to making $1 million a year, not working at all. And you go, well, that's pretty bravado. I said, and I'm talking about as a chiropractor, practicing chiropractor. I'm going, well, yeah, it is, because that's what I did. And I didn't do just $1 million a year. I did multiple millions of dollars a year. So we know exactly the systems it takes and how to do that. And there's no reason that it can't be done. Now, it took me 7 years. But if you follow my system, it only takes 3 years. And so here's just a reminder of the steps. Because sometimes when you're practicing, you get bogged down with so much minutia, so much little stuff that will not advance your practice. Sometimes you need to do it, but sometimes you waste way more time doing it than what you should, because it's bigger than what you think. It's bigger than what it is. So I just wanted to kind of clear the deck a little bit and go, okay, so let's go into 5 different levels of business. So you start your business, that's one level. Okay. Well, how far will that go? I'm talking about the chiropractic practice. Well, it'll take you about 20 or 40 visits a week from market forces. So in other words, if you took the new patients that would naturally call from you just being in that area, from how long the typical chiropractor could keep the patient, for a few patient visits until they lose them. In other words, we're talking about a chiropractor who doesn't have any knowledge or skill. That chiropractor will get stuck at 20 to 40 visits a week. He'll get about 6 to 8 new patients a month. They'll stay for 5 or 6 visits, and that's it. That's called market forces. So when you're totally ignorant, that's what you'll get, market forces. Okay. Now, remember, before we go up the chart, so what we're doing here is we're going up the chart from starting a business to you're not even working in the business, but you're making $1 million a year. Those are the steps, okay? Now, to go through each of the steps, we've got to look at 7 major categories. And obviously, there's a lot more detail per category, but these are the big categories. And it's always a different problem at every stage. Chiropractors only think it's new patients, new patients, new patients, and it's not. So out of the 5 different stages, let's identify the different typical problems that that will limit you. These are the typical problems that will restrict or limit you. So we're looking at space, labor, equipment, knowledge, skill, motivation, and human resource systems, hiring, management, and systems. Those are overwhelmingly the biggest problems that will limit a doctor from growing his business or practice. Okay, so you start your practice. How many of you get market forces? You get 6 to 8 new patients. They stay 5 or 6 visits. You see 20 to 40 visits a week. That's the chiropractor who is completely ignorant, has no skill level whatsoever. No knowledge, no skill level. So is space typically the issue? No. Is labor? No. Equipment? No. Knowledge? Yes. Skill? Yes. Motivation? No. Usually you're hurt. You're usually in survival when you're starting your practice. And then the ability to know how to hire, train, and manage and have systems, staffing, etc. Yeah. That falls under the skill level of hiring and managing, training, and systems and staff. So you're faced with very different problems at 20 to 40 visits a week. Okay, let's take it to the next level now. So the next level doctors typically get stuck at is usually 60 to 80 visits. That's the next place I see doctors plateau. So let's walk through the checklist again. Is space typically a problem at 60 to 80 visits? No. Labor? No. It's starting to a little bit. Right now, when doctors see 60 to 80 visits, they definitely need 1 full-time person. But they're getting close to needing a second person to do the therapy because you only have so much time. So the doctor's got to be freed up to be able to see you. It's getting close. It's getting close. Usually right at that 80 visit mark, that'll be an inhibiting factor if it's just you in the back doing therapy. And especially what most chiropractors do, which is totally foolish, is they run the front person to run back and forth, back and forth. And they think they're going to grow their practice that way by having the front person answer the phone, schedule appointments, do everything, put people on therapy, off therapy. In other words, run them back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They actually think they're going to grow their practice that way. Worst thing you could do. So space, labor, equipment. Is equipment typically an issue at 60 to 80 event? No. Knowledge? Yes. Now, did you have to know a little bit of something with either patient education or marketing? Usually patient education to help keep patients. Yeah, you had to know a little something. Are you good? No. So knowledge with patient education, usually a little bit. Usually the doctor doesn't have much knowledge in marketing at all. How to get new patients, they're typically totally blind to how that process works. So you got knowledge, skill, patient retention, marketing. And then do you have motivation problem? If the doctor is the only breadwinner, no, because you're still in survival. You're still not kicking butt. If the doctor's married to somebody that's making a good income, you typically, in other words, between the doctor's income and his spouse's income, you typically have a motivation problem right now. I see a lot of doctors get stuck at that 80 visit week. And one of the biggest problems is lack of motivation. And I'll tell you what typically happens right there. One of the common phone calls I get as a consultant is when that wife who brought in, $50,000 or $70,000 a year, plus the doctor's, $70,000, $80,000 a year, seeing 80 visits a week. The biggest problem is the wife wants to start having children. Now the doctor gets scared because he doesn't have that supplemental $50,000 a year, and he knows the kid's going to cost more. That's the number one call that I typically get as a consultant. So in other words, they just cruise along because they're typically making $100,000, $150,000 a year with no kids. For two people, that's a decent income. It's definitely out of survival and security. And then that's it. So that's another situation. So you got knowledge, skill, motivation. And then the next, and motivation's a big one. That's why I say some of the worst doctors that I have come to me are the ones that are seeing 80 to 120 visits a week because they're making enough money not to do anything. Not to do anything. That's like some of the worst motivating doctors there are. I like them when they're like starving to death, or they're just fed up, they're hungry, and they've already done well, but they want to kick butt. They want associate doctors, they want to work part-time. They're just tired of seeing 80 visits a week and just getting by. Because that's all you do if you're seeing 80 visits a week. You just get by. That's all you do. You don't live the lifestyle that you thought you would when you became a chiropractor. And you get fed up with it. So that's the next level. And then, excuse me, and then is human resources and systems a problem? Yes. Typically, that's the third biggest problem in a chiropractic office after patient education, marketing. It's hiring and training new systems. That's typically the third biggest problem in a chiropractic office. Okay, so let's say we get a little more knowledge, skill, motivation. We go past 60 to 80. The next place I see people plateau is 120 to 130 visits a week. That's the next place. And essentially, we're dealing with the same thing as 60 to 80, but a little higher. So is space typically a problem? No. Is equipment a problem? Not really. It could be, but not really. Is labor a problem? Yeah. Typically right now, doctors don't, if they haven't hired somebody else, that's a huge problem. They won't be able to grow past that with one employee at the front. Knowledge and skill, yes. Are they better? Do they definitely have some knowledge in patient education? Yes. Do they have some knowledge in marketing? Yes. In other words, they're definitely getting more of their fair share of people staying and more new patients. And to do that, you had to have some knowledge and skill. Okay, so that's knowledge and skill. Motivation Again, it's the same thing. It's tremendously demotivating for most doctors when they're seeing 130, 150 patient visits a week, making $150,000 a year, especially if their wife's making $50,000 a year. So you typically have a huge motivation problem right in that area also. And then systems, yeah, what about space and labor or hiring, things like that? Doctor definitely knows something. You had to know something to see 150 patient visits a week with who to hire, how to train, what kind of system. You at least have to have all the rudimentary stuff in place. Okay. All right. So that's typically what we see there. And then let's come up to maximizing your potential. Most doctors can see about 200 patient visits a week, emotionally, physically, week in and week out. That's when they're pretty good at what they do. They got good system. So let's go through. Is space typically a problem? It's usually not, because most chiropractors always get way too much space than what they need. The average chiropractic office should only have 1,400 square feet, give or take 200, and that would be for 3 doctors. You can easily put 3 doctors in 1,400 square feet if it's laid out properly. Highly efficient. So is space typically a problem for a doctor seeing 150 visits a week? No. I mean, you can have the creep effect where doctors just kind of, it's actually called Parkinson's rule, that whatever space you have, you go to fill. So a lot of times there's a lot of bad efficiencies with space, just because doctors got lazy with putting stuff places with systems. I see that a lot. That's called Parkinson's rule in business. And then, so that space, labor, is labor typically? No, typically the doctor has at least 2 full-time people. And could they do more with the 2 people? Yeah. So labor is typically not an issue at that point. Space, labor, is equipment an issue? Not really. Not really. Then you go to knowledge and skill. Yeah, now they definitely have the knowledge or skill to do well, but they're lacking the knowledge and skill to take it over the top, how to leverage themselves out of the game. They're pretty good by themselves, but they typically don't have the knowledge to leverage it off to associate doctors. And then motivation, same thing. Motivation goes to hell when doctors are seeing those upper numbers, 150, 170, things like that. Because they're making good money. Usually you can make anywhere between $250 and $500,000 a year, depending on your dollar per visit. So there's huge profit in those higher numbers. So space, labor, equipment, knowledge, skill, motivation, and then systems. So usually it's pretty good at systems. I mean, to see 170 visits a week, you got to be good at people, hiring, managing, training, systems, space, labor, equipment. You got to be somewhat motivated. You see, so that's you're dealing with a different animal at 170 visits a week versus 120 or 130. Totally different problem. Totally different problem. And then comes the last phase, which is how to step out. So in other words, maximizing your ability. And that's usually about 180 to 220 visits a week is what I found, emotionally, physically, all that kind of stuff. So what becomes the limiting factor there? Is space typically a problem? No. Labor, no, that's not a problem. The doctor already understands labor. He already understands space. He understands efficient space to get to that point, not wasting space. Space, labor, same with equipment. Usually the equipment's fine too, no problem. And then you go into knowledge and skill. Usually that doctor is very good at the first phase of business, which is exchanging time for money. He's good at that. Okay. And then go into motivation. Usually doctors are at that point are definitely higher motivated. You got to be higher motivated just to get to that point. So there's typically higher motivation. Usually it's either due to internal drive, or some doctors are just fed up. They're fed up of having to go into the office every day. They've been practicing for 20 years and they're like, how's this thing going to end? Is this how my life's going to end? Me going into this office 4.5 days a week? Well, that gets to be very discouraging, and that actually starts pissing people off. I got to find another way, to have a higher quality of life, as I get older. And then also doctors don't have much income. A lot of times they've already lost money through, a first divorce if they made money or they made bad investments. And so now they gotta make up. So that I see that a lot. And then, so is space, labor, equipment typically a problem? No. Knowledge and skill, not for exchanging time for money. The problem, and then you go to motivation, it's typically not for that doctor because you don't get to that level without having some, motivation. And then human resources, hiring, training, managing systems, no, typically not either. So have I found to be the limiting factor that stops people, doctors, from going past, and not, in other words, they go up to their glass ceiling. Their glass ceiling is of exchanging time for money. And then the limiting factor is they can't let go. They don't know how to train other doctors. I mean, it has to do with fear. It has to do with ignorance, training. I found, and a lot of it has to do with the inability to let go, because it takes a lot after you've put so much time and energy to control your business to get at that point, to then train somebody else who doesn't have the knowledge or skill level that you do, and they're going to mess up. It takes a tremendous amount of patience, knowledge, and skill to train somebody, to get them up to speed real fast, to decrease the damage, because they're going to do damage. You can't just let somebody come in and take over a practice seeing 180, 200 plus visits a week. They will destroy it. They'll run it right down into the ground. So the big key that I found there is training to let go. And again, we do baby steps there. And it's a whole nother way of thinking about a business when you train to let go. Because it's real easy for you to control yourself. It is unbelievably difficult to try to motivate, influence, and control somebody else, to get them to do what you want and need them to do in that system. Especially chiropractors, because chiropractors didn't go to school to listen to somebody else. So that's the last level. And it is I'll tell you from personal experience, and I'm a control freak. It was very difficult to let go. But the key is knowing the systems, how to let go, especially how to first, how to pick people. Second, how to train people, how to stair step, all the training procedures that we use. And that is what helps make the crossover. So there's no big paradigm. In other words, there's no crazy stuff that happens fast, like you give them 5 patients and they lose them all. That's enough to freak you out and stop doing it altogether. So that kind of stuff doesn't happen. So we go into make sure we know the cycles of training, the 4 stages of training, what they're going to get. We make sure we know how to hire the right person for the right job. And then it's very, very intense micro step training, especially in the first 30, 60, 90 days. But some people can't do it. Some people have heart. And the people that can't will never leverage their time. They'll always have to work the rest of their life. The ones that do reach that point experience a whole new satisfaction practicing. The energy goes up for practicing, the love for practicing everything goes up when you don't have to be there every day, even if you just have to be there part-time. Your whole enthusiasm skyrockets. Your quality of life skyrockets. It's unbelievable. I mean, you can't even believe it until, I can talk about it all I want, but until you've actually crossed that barrier and you have your practice running, just like it would if you were there. And you literally could step away and it runs just like you were there. It's phenomenal. The freedom, the energy, the focus, the control, it's unbelievable empowerment, because you can create anything at will, and you don't have to be the one being there doing it. It's phenomenal. And of course, that's where you make the most money, is when you leverage. The least amount of money you'll ever make is exchanging your time for money, going into work. You'll make way more money leveraging your money through investments but you'll wait. Remember, that's 14%. Remember, only 1% of millionaires become millionaires exchanging their time for money. You have a 99% chance you're not going to become a millionaire if you're a chiropractor practicing full time. And you don't leverage money. Now there's 14% that become millionaires through leveraging money. You got to make a lot of money to leverage money. You got to make $8 million to make a passive income of $100,000 a year at a 5% interest rate. So you got to make a lot of money. And of course, 85% of the millionaires through leveraging time. And that's where, the staff helps you with leveraging time. You can significantly make more money with a marketing assistant than trying to do it on your own. If you know what you're doing, you know how to train them and all that stuff, you know the systems, etc. And especially with associate doctors. Once you know how to pick, hire, and train associate doctors, your life's never the same. Because now you know how to make it work. In other words, make it work for both people. Because we are always interested in a mutually beneficial relationship. And I always say, our associate doctors, the way we structure it, they will not have any better situation than being an associate doctor in our office with risk, management, employees, pushing, just everything about being a small business owner, they won't have. All the big issues will be removed, and they'll be able to take time off and get paid when they're off because the other doctor will treat their patients, which you can't do when you're on your own. So there's very low. So that's why ours, and we're in a position to give better benefits, including pay, than if they were to go do it on their own. So you're talking about money they can make more, benefits, all the benefits, especially the time off benefits, responsible benefits for hiring, training, and managing staff, money benefit, investment benefits, all the money it takes to run a practice and invest in a practice, and the energy to keep it going. They don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And they still will do better statistically than if they own their own practice. That's the system that we put in place. Because people will always go to where it's better. So we always make ours better than where they can go. And that's why they stay. If that doesn't exist, they'll leave. That's how it works. So those are the levels. Now those are very good generalizations with categories. Obviously, each of these categories are unbelievably specific. When I talk about patient retention, it's unbelievably specific. When I talk about marketing, it's unbelievably specific. When we talk about hiring and training, it's unbelievably specific. When we talk about systems within the office, that's unbelievably specific. So obviously this was a very general overview, but those are the different problems people have. None of the chiropractors see that though. They always think they just need more new patients if the marketing would work better. They always want to spend more money to get new patients. That's the only solution chiropractors ever think of until they're educated. That's the ignorant solution. How can I spend money now? Every time I see on Facebook, spend more money on Facebook, spend more money on this machine. It'll create more new patients. I can't tell you how many times I see stuff like that. A machine is going to create more new patients. Explain that one to me. And then they fall for it, and then they get stuck with a lease. And then none of these new patients show up, and now they got big trouble on their hands. So anyway, that's the hierarchy. That's a really good way of thinking. And of course, all of that is evaluated through a statistical analysis. We look at the office, we look at the space, we look at the labor, we look at the equipment. We'll look at your statistics. That'll tell you the knowledge and skill. We'll look at your motivation, what you're willing to do and not do. We'll look at your staffing. Do you have the right people in place, and are they trained? All of that is evaluated. And when you do that, that's when you find the weaknesses. That's when you find the problems. And of course, that's when you can create the solution. And that's why it's so easy to build a practice. It's so easy. You just follow the steps. Most doctors we have follow the steps, but they follow them real slow as opposed to, and I'll just share with you, I'm getting ready to open a practice here in the next few months. We're going to take that up to $1 million a year in 1 year. There's not going to be lollygagging around. I'm not going to let him lollygag around. It's going to be unbelievably intense. It's going to be unbelievably focused and unbelievably intense. Intense. But there's a saying: you can play the first 5 years of your life and have to work the rest of your life, or you can work the first 5 years of your life and play the rest of your life. Well, this guy is going to work the first 5 years of his life, and he's going to be able to play the rest of his life like I did when I retired at age 33.